Welcome to Strategy Pages News Talk, where columnist and retired Colonel Austin Bay and host Dan Masterson discuss current events.
Austin, it's time for our weekend chat. One of the things that sort of caught my attention this week was that the North Koreans actually started to engage in combat, and it did not look like it was going well for them. It looked like, from what I saw, it was basically probing attacks that they were doing into the Kursk area. Did you pick up on any of that?
Yes, Dan, I did. From about 4 or 5 different news sources. There was one that I looked at that's a Ukrainian site in English, and what I could gather from that particular site is that there was contact in that Kursk region where Ukraine has taken a bite out of Russian territory. There was contact with North Koreans into the first week, let's say December the 10th as a date. It was kind of hazy, but the report said it was confirmed, and then within a couple of days there were photos and even very recently a video that I saw of all places on the Daily Mail, the London Daily Mail, but it was other places of North Koreans coming into contact with Ukrainian forces. But there were a couple of recent reports that the North Korean mercenaries were just walking slowly towards Ukrainian positions, and the Ukrainians were just cutting them down with machine guns and mortar fire. Now, that's something that the Ukrainians...
The one I actually saw, Austin, they'd actually walked out into the middle of a field and got tired and sat down and then got...
Okay. Dan, maybe I saw the first part of that clip. I think there could have been 2 different clips, all right? But what they were doing was drawing fire. They weren't moving very quickly, and maybe that's what they're there for, to draw fire. Now, just hold that. In other words, yes, they're absolutely sacrificial, because the Ukrainians reveal their positions when the North Korean mercenaries move forward. That said, there have been reports really through the last several months of Russians operating in that way in order to preserve what armor and armored vehicles, tanks and mechanized infantry fighting vehicles that they have. Because when those come out, the Ukrainians hit them with drones or anti-tank weapons, swamp them with artillery. So they're using infantry probes to move forward and make the initial contact, identify where the Ukrainian defenses are, and then they're using their armored vehicles or tanks with tank cannon to shoot at a longer range at the Iranian positions. So it's a tactic that we've seen the Russians employ, but now it's with North Korean mercenaries. And I didn't have quality enough that, I tried to look at it as granularly as I could to see what these North Korean soldiers looked at. Maybe, did you have an impression of them? Although I have a comment on it. Did they look young?
The stuff I saw of them was pretty grainy, and so it was,
okay, same here.
Hard to tell.
All right. But see, the thing is that South Korea has been following this deployment, South Korean intelligence, South Korean diplomats, South Korean media closely. And you see some other reports I've read, I don't do it regularly, once a week, see what Yonhap has to say about this particular issue, or the North Koreans providing munitions as well as manpower to the Russians. And the South Koreans very, very interested in it, and they have excellent intelligence sources on North Korea. And early on, and I'm saying end of October, early November, there is a Wall Street Journal article from about that time frame. I'm going to say last week of October of 2024, that the reports, and I'm guessing these were from South Korean sources, was that many of these young North Korean soldiers that were put into this group of anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 soldiers provided for Putin's Ukraine war were conscripts, and they were malnourished, and they were small. Now, do we trust that? Try to look at as many photos as possible, but that was mentioned in that particular article, and it's been mentioned at least one other article I've seen in the last now 2 months, because this about again about 2 months ago saw these reports that which indicates that you've got poor, starving boys who are cannon fodder, and all they're doing is putting money in Kim Jong-un's pocket. They're been rented out, loaned out, not even loaned out, sent out to die because the Russians have been taking such horrendous casualties in their fight against the Ukrainians, given the Ukrainians' attrition tactics that they are employing against the Russians. Of course, the Russians are employing another attrition attacks against the Ukrainians. But essentially, North Korea has given Russia a 2 weeks worth of casualties, I guess, if it's 12,000 men. Again, the numbers on this are squishy. I've seen as little as 8. The highest I've seen is 12,000 men, in other words, a division. And also, I remember what the quote I was, or the point I was going to make is, early on, I read, oh, these will be special operations soldiers from North Korea because North Korea maintains such a large special ops capability. Well, a lot of their special operations troops wouldn't cut it, even Spetsnaz commandos, or definitely not Green Berets, definitely not Special Air Services. They're perhaps better trained infantry specialized in sabotage, like mines, blowing up obstacles, and assassination. I know North Korea, I don't want to give the wrong impression here, North Korea has some very, very elite organizations like the ones that launched the attack on the Blue House and have also, 20, 25 years ago, were running rampant when they would cross the DMZ. It's a very, very small number of troops, and I really don't think that Kim's government would want to waste that asset by selling that out to the Russians. I think that we're seeing conscripts predominantly, with a few veterans to leaven the numbers and provide a little bit of spine, but they're there to absorb casualties so the Russians can figure out where the Ukrainians are in the tactical situation, and then no fewer Russians are dying, and from Putin's point of view, good, that begins to minimize some of the complaints from Russian families about the losses of Russian soldiers, which you follow some things that have been on strategy page that Jim Dunnigan's been producing. There really is a anti-Putin movement, a strong one within Russia, that from the families that have lost soldiers in this war, and it is a political problem for Putin. Hence, what does he do? He tried to hire Nepalese troops. Remember that? That didn't go very well because Nepal objected. He's, of course, used the Wagner Group, but the Wagner Group proved to be a potential threat, a real threat to Putin, and it's what was left of it largely absorbed into Russian forces. There's still Wagner units operating around Africa. They tried to recruit soldiers from the Central African Republic, the CAR, and I wrote something about that for strategy page. It was unclear how successful they were. It's also unclear what kind of training, the degree of training they got from the recruits they had in the Central African Republic. But they did make an effort to try to get the soldiers from the Central African Republic and perhaps from Chad as well. But then North Korea is an ally of Russia. North Korea has been providing munitions. North Korea now has, it's got fairly large resources. What I was going to say, fairly large army, at least on paper. They've got about 25 million people in North Korea, and 8.5 million of them are supposed to be in the army or in the army reserves. That's trained, able to supposedly trained. But these young men that are employed in Russia now, it looks like they're there just to make money for the Kim regime and die in the process.
Yeah, the speculation is that North Koreans are getting oil and food, which they always need food. I would suspect, like you say, these guys are malnourished and they aren't top of the line, because why would you send your top of the line guys?
Well, that's the point I was making. Now, see, all of this though, I don't have access to intelligence reports. I've got access to a number of what I consider to be over the years excellent military reporting sources, and I pay attention to what Yonhap, the South Korean news agency, reports. I know what I read from the Ukrainian reports, Ukrainian side, and the like. And there are a couple of Ukrainian English language sites that over time they've proved to be very accurate in describing situation at the front line. In other words, they're not a propaganda source for Ukraine, but particularly describing the tactical reality of the fighting in eastern Ukraine. And these North Korean soldiers, as far as we know, have not been deployed in Ukraine yet. They've been deployed in Russia and the Kursk incursion, but it's definitely been in contact. And according to one of the Ukrainian sites, this week, the Ukrainians said they slaughtered, and that was one of the words I saw in this particular report, a probe by North Korean soldiers. For all you and I know, that's the two little videos that we're talking about. May have been the same video. I don't know. But from that.
One of the things, both coming out of the Ukraine and military analysts in other places, is these North Koreans just are not trained for battle in the plains of Ukraine and Russia. The
fighting that they're trained for, I think that's a valid point, is mountainous areas of the Korean Peninsula, but
right.
They've also look, there are open areas around Seoul, and then if you get south of Seoul and you're heading down that high-speed train route to Chonan and ultimately Mokpo, they're fast avenues of attack.
Right.
Going down the peninsula. And you can see that the North Korean attack in 1950 followed that. That's when they had a tank advantage.
Right. They went down those two corridors on the coast. Yeah.
Exactly. So but this is 75 years later, 74 years later.
Well,
we know North Korea's offensive capabilities against South Korea are limited, except for the possible use of special weapons,
right?
Nuclear weapons. All right, but it's still your point's valid, because if they're defending against the South Korean attack, they're going to be in the mountains, and you're going to have the public image of what the Korean War was about, which everybody's fighting in trenches and shelling each other in a mountainous area. So these guys, I think that's one of those reports that once you put it in context, I don't think they know where they are or what they're going to meet, and also not prepared for the kind of dispersed but high level of firepower that the way the Ukrainians are fighting. They got out and they're moving their artillery. That's using the artillery, mobile firepower. Maneuvering firepower. That's one of the old terms that the U.S. Army used to use when talking about effective artillery support. We're
Yeah.
going to maneuver our fires. In other words, the Ukraine has been doing that.
And the Russians may have just decided to use these guys to probe Ukrainian positions to try to get in what intel they can, and they don't care whether they have a lot of casualties or not. Now, the reports on casualties I'm hearing on the 2 or 3 probes that happened this last week were, when you say slaughter, that's all relative, right? But they were 200 to 300 casualties.
Look, I said that was in one of the reports. But you see, if you've got a 500 men deployed as light infantry, and they come in and they have 200 or 300 casualties, guess what?
That's a slaughter.
Now, we're not debate the word or debate a word that the reporter or the writer of this particular.
But these probes were met with a lot of resistance, and apparently they did not achieve anything of significance. So,
well, Dan, remember I started describing what I'd seen. They were replicating a tactic that the Russians have been using, which is a small group of infantry are exposed. I mean, they're lambs to the slaughter, moving forward and being used to probe Ukrainian dispositions. The Ukrainian lines are such as they are, and when the Ukrainians engage them, the Russians have been firing artillery and long-range tank fire, and they're not exposing their armored vehicles first. They've been using little packets of infantry, and it looked very similar in that particular video I saw. Oh, they're using the same tactic, except they don't know what they're running into. And a lot of Russians, and we've had many reports of this, and then on Strategy Talk, Jim and I've talked about it, is that Russians unwilling to go under fire because they've seen their units decimated. I'll use that instead of slaughtered this time in prior attacks, and their morale issues. And here are these new North Korean soldiers, and they're out walking right into the teeth of Ukrainian positions. And I don't think the Ukrainians are necessarily that close to them, but if they see them, and you have heavy machine guns and light machine guns, once you get within 1,000 meters, because a 50 caliber machine gun has a really effective range of well over 1,000 meters. You can hit a 1,500 meter target if you've got the unobstructed range with a 50 caliber machine gun. And say light machine guns, 600, 700, 800 meters. And the Ukrainians they're running into are experienced combat soldiers.
Yeah.
That's why slaughter may be a good word, Dan.
Well, the other thing I saw was that there were probably cluster munitions being used against them. So that, and if they were walking out in open fields and like that, that would have been devastating. Yeah.
Good. Well, I just found on this, I popped up a couple of notes I made earlier this week, and it's just roughly a third of North Korea's 26 million. What did I say? 25 million people? I forget. I think it's 26 million people are regarded as being in active or reserve forces with the military. And of course, that's not how many are on quote unquote active duty all the time. It's probably somewhere between 1.1 million, 1.5 million, whatever, because they're maintaining the ceasefire line on the DMZ and protecting the regime. That's what their forces are really about. But they're using some of them as a source of income from Russia. That's a harsh thing to say, but that's what's going on.
Well, that's what they are.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what's going on.
Well, let's wrap it up there, Austin. Good chat, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Take care, Dan. Bye.
All right. Bye.